before we begin, I'd like to start by acknowledging and paying my respects to the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm joining this presentation from today. And I'd also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional custodians of all the places from which people are joining this meeting today. And I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So, like I said, thank you for joining us this evening. This is an event which is part of our series of events we're running at Farmwall as part of Biodiversity Month, which is coming to an end now that we're at the end of September. As I said on the screen just before I turned my video on, if you'd like to comment in the chat and say where you're joining from or why you're joining, then that would be really great. And what we'll be doing is Gear from Farmwall will do a short introduction about Farmwall and who we are and what we do. And then we'll have our guest speaker, Dr. Dominique Hes, do a presentation on biodiversity in the city. And then at the end, we'll have a little prize giveaway, which I won't say what the prize is yet, but it's a tool for promoting biodiversity. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Geert, Farmwall co-founder and CEO. Please unmute yourself, Geert.
All right. I should be proficient at Zoom after 2 years of, of doing this. Yeah, good evening and welcome everyone, and welcome to our event. And we're very pleased to have, I'm grateful to have Dr. Dominique Hes with us today. Yeah, this is a formal event regarding our monthly series. This month is all about biodiversity. At Farmwall, we exist to create a healthy, educated and connected community of Australians, empowered to take action towards a regenerative food system. So we developed the technology, tools and educational experiences to bring us back into the food system, to learn how to grow food at home, in the living room, and in our own gardens and backyards. So we would truly like to see a green city, and we're on a mission to transform our cities into food-producing ecosystems. I'm very excited about today's event because 5 years ago, when Farmwall was at the very early stages of its beginning, the business wasn't making money yet and there were no wages, so I had to be creative, and I was Uber driving at the time. On one fine day when I was driving around the city, I picked up Dominique Hes. I forgot exactly from or from somewhere else, but yeah, we had a great chat in the car about urban farming and how the future of a green city could look like, which provided me with a lot of inspiration to continue the path, which has now led to the business we know today. But I'll pass it back on to Patrick for a proper introduction, and then looking forward to have a chat in the Q&A.
Thanks, Geert. So, yeah, like I said earlier, for Biodiversity Month, we've had several events, most of which are seminars or talks about biodiversity. It's something we're really passionate about at Farmwall. And so this event is the last one. And it's also, I think, in my opinion, and the rest of us at Farmwall, the most exciting one, because we're being joined by Dr. Dominique Hes, who is a researcher in sustainability practices and applications in the built environment, on green cities, infrastructure, and more recently on indoor plants. Dr. Dominique has also written several books and papers on regenerative sustainability and many other topics, and she's also the chair of the board at Greenfleet. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Dominique, and you can begin your presentation.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Geert. Yes, that was an eventful and interesting discussion that we had as you were driving me home. And it just shows you how, how every conversation can turn into something magical, and what's happening with Farmwall and the potential of that to bring food directly indoors and connect people to their food systems is just really exciting. My details are there, and this is an animation. There are quite a few of these animations going around at the moment of how we could transform our cities, bring in more greenery, more ecosystems, have more social life, and have more diversity. So in preparing for today's presentation, I thought let's just start with getting a combined understanding of what biodiversity is, and then talk about why it's important to have biodiversity. And then I thought I would delve into something that I'm particularly passionate about, particularly through the last years of lockdown, how important that connection to nature and to diversity is for our well-being. And then I thought I would finish up with a brief, this is what you can do at home to support biodiversity. So biodiversity is about diversity in biotic systems, so living systems and their diversity. It tends to be applied to forests, oceans, rivers, and so forth, but it can equally be applied to our cities. And biodiversity, or diversity particularly, is critical for resilience and adaptation. So if you have a diverse system, if one aspect of the system becomes ill or attacked or degrades for some reason, then other parts, Poppy, could you put, yeah, thank you. Then other parts of the system will move into those spaces. Okay, so why is it important to us? So having a biodiverse, thriving, resilient, adaptable ecosystem helps with climate change. Climate change is affecting our cities. Having more greenery in our cities lowers those impacts. But, it goes all the way from the whole water cycle or watershed to your backyard. So you have benefits towards creating more resilient system at home by having diverse environmental systems. You can grow food. The more diverse the food growing, the richer the food, the higher the nutritional value. Monocultures have really degraded that nutrient value, plus they're more susceptible to pests, which means we put more chemicals on them, which it creates this vicious cycle, whereas with a diverse system, you actually create a virtuous cycle. It can be linked to cultural significance. So biodiversity, we're working with the Gubbi Gubbi in Noosa through Greenfleet, doing some reforestation up there, and through and they're partners with us. They are co-creating what this looks like. They are driving how the ecosystem restoration can link into their stories of place and their cultural and social narratives. So there's a lot of opportunities there. And then to our health, so being linked and connected to a very diverse system, a very diverse soil to put our hands into when we're growing things, a very diverse ecosystem to look out on, helps with our mental and physical well-being. And I'm going to focus in on that right now. So we're going to dive into a bit of neuroscience to explain why these benefits are there. And one of the seminal books that really alerted us to the need to be connected to a diverse nature is The Last Child in the Woods by Richard Louv. I'm getting some feedback, if everyone can go on mute, thank you. And that book really brought forward this idea of a nature deficit disorder, that actually for our well-being mentally, we need to be connected to a diverse ecosystems. And we're starting to see a response to that in many of our cities. I just put this image in here because it's beautiful. But having said that, when we grow ecosystems on our built environment, we do need to realise that it's not something that we put in there and forget. We have to build a relationship with these systems, these ecosystems. And the value is in the building of the relationship with it. It's not about being separate from the ecosystems that we create. So that relationship is very important, and it goes to the benefits, which I'll go into right now. So most people, when you ask them of a favourite childhood memory, to think back of a place where they were very happy, a thing that makes them smile, they'll talk about sun-smelling sheets and sun on our faces and the beach and a walk through nature. Mostly, for most people, that sense of joy is about connecting, will be related to a connection to nature in some way. Edward O. Wilson talks about this, came up with a biophilia hypothesis, in which he researched and described the innate need for humans to connect to life and lifelike processes. But why is that? Why are we healthier when we connect to a biodiverse nature? And here we're going to dive into a little bit of neuroscience. But we'll start with the top right-hand little diagram, which talks about the fact that only the last little bit, the red bit of that diagram in human development, have we been mostly in buildings. Before that, we were mostly out in nature, growing food, hunter-gathering, telling stories, looking at the stars, being very intimately connected to the seasons. It's only the last little red sliver there where we have been disconnected from nature by placing ourselves inside. So our brain, for that majority of time, evolved in nature. And so the way it, and I've just put these terms here, not because I'm going to explain them in any detail, but so you have them there for reference. So we have the thalamus here, the little yellow thing. That one translates what we see, what we hear, what we smell. And it translates that. Firstly, it goes to the amygdala, and it goes about half a second, 0.05 of a second. It goes to there before it goes to our other bits that make sense of what we're hearing, smelling, or seeing. So that amygdala, that yellow bit, connects firstly to this little orange bit, the amygdala, which then tells us whether we are in danger or not. And sort of that 0.05 of a second later, that information goes to the parts of our brains, the back end, which tells us what sensing form and motion and so forth, and the front bits, which then tell us how to move, how to react, the expressions that we need to have, how to connect and so forth. But the most important thing is this. So when we sense our environment, it goes to that thalamus first, and it then goes to the fight-flight bit. And our brains mostly evolved in nature. And so these two bits, the yellow and the orange dots, are more relaxed when it can see and be connected to nature, because that's where we evolved. And the benefit is extended when it's diverse nature. So it's not about being in a monoculture. We don't get the same. It's better than being in a room without a view and no images and no plants. But being out in nature, the greater the diversity, the greater the benefit. And that goes back to this evolution of where there was diversity, those ecosystems were more resilient, and therefore we were able to survive there longer. We didn't need to move on as quickly. And so this is all connected in our brains. The main thing is, you know, if you're walking across the street and you see a Prius heading for you, you don't stop in the middle of the street and go, I wonder how they can afford a Prius. Do we have Priuses in Australia? No, you don't do any of that. The message goes in, hits the thalamus, goes to your amygdala and says, danger, jump out of the way. And then you might wonder about how they managed to get a Prius in Australia. But it's that fight-flight bit works first. So when we're in nature, in a complex, diverse nature, then that bit's more relaxed and everything else works better in our bodies. We did some research for the app called Plant Life Balance, which you can download for free online, and we summarised 101 studies on the benefits of plants to people. And Richard Louver in The Last Child in the Woods summarises some of that. There's been a lot of research done since. And it talks about the right-hand image with the little person. It talks about the benefits of being connected to diverse nature, and both from a physiological perspective and a mental perspective. If we're not connected to nature, which is this around our nervous system image on the left, so the eyes go to that thalamus and amygdala, or the ears or the smell, and then from that, if we're not connected to nature, it becomes more hypervigilant. And because of that, if it doesn't sense water, vegetation, food, shelter, then it starts being in that sympathetic nervous state, which increases your heart rate, increases your respiration, does all of that, increases blood pressure and so forth, suppresses your immune. So on the other side, if there is a sense of nature, then you don't have that, and it's diverse and it's complex and it relaxes that inner part of the brain. Then we have the opposite to that. We have decreased heart rate, we have strengthened immune systems. And we particularly see this with children who haven't learnt to make sense of the world as much. When they're in nature, they are calmer, they are able to learn more. I exaggerate this, but I say when we're connected to nature, when we see plants around us and complexity and diversity, it's like having a good night's sleep, and we know how much better we function when we've had a good night's sleep. And what the research since Edward O. Wilson wrote the biophilia hypothesis shown us is that these benefits increase with complexity and diversity, and I've explained a little bit about why that is. So the City of Melbourne, where I'm now working, have been working really hard to increase the diversity within the city, and we have a person on the call today, Thami, who used to work for the City of Melbourne, and part of his team are responsible for much of the greening of the laneways, and I'll show you some beautiful images around that in a minute. But the City of Melbourne has done an analysis of the types of species and diversity that it has, is making conscious choices to increase that diversity, whether it is a spring flower meadow along the Birra, or whether it's increasing green roofs, increasing tree diversity and so forth. They are really working hard, and there's a great link there to how the city is doing that. Here is one of my favourite little laneways. It's just joyful to walk through the city and to find these places. It's a breath of fresh air. The city can be quite a stressful place, and these sorts of spaces, apart from cooling and so forth, also work on that psychological level. So when you have spaces with increased greenery, you have less crime, you have less social issues. Now, bringing nature into the city, because we have so many hard surfaces, as I said, does require that we make a conscious relationship with the nature that we bring in to help it thrive. So it needs to be a co-creation of what nature looks like in the city. We don't just put it there and walk away. It has to be nurtured by us. Here is another beautiful image of a greened laneway. So I thought I'd finish up, and this will give us time for Q&A and so forth. I could go on for hours on all of the various aspects of how to bring nature in and biodiversity, how it's being involved, how we're working on the planning system to try and increase more nature, how various councils are working with their communities and have online things on what to plant within your gardens. But from my perspective, what is also really important is just to have a go. I have plants that don't do so well, and I have plants that thrive, and I learn from them, and I bring, it's a relationship. So here's some photos from my garden around all of the various plants that I have in there. From, small plants on a balcony to veggie gardens and natives. So what you can do at home, Farmwall have got this wonderful seed bombing kit, which I've bought a couple for my daughter and I to do together. But your local councils will have the suggested plants to plant in your yards to support local biodiversity. And for balconies, you can actually do a surprising amount on your balconies. For biodiversity, if you have bugs, don't spray them. And this is, it can be quite a frustration, you know, if you're an avid gardener and suddenly you're getting little spots in places, or you've got the gall wasp coming around to your lemons and so forth. But if you think about how biodiversity is connected and everything's connected to everything else, you poison a bug, that bug dies, a lizard comes and eats that bug, a bird comes and eats that lizard, and you're building up these toxins within the environment, and they do have an impact. So if you have bugs, don't spray them, try and find natural ways. So I have planted around my doors and windows a mosquito plant. It smells a bit like camphor. And I have lots of lavender, which you can see in the background there, and rosemary. And these things keep the insects away naturally without me having to spray. If you have weeds, don't spray them. You know, elbow grease, see it as a gym exercise to take those weeds out. Again, poisoning weeds means that as much as they are water soluble and dissipate in the environment, according to the research, you are killing something with a chemical, and that has consequences. And so, you know, whereas there's lots of benefits to pulling it out by hand, right? Look, you're outside, you're getting your hands dirty and so forth. So if you have weeds, don't spray them. If you have bees, don't spray them. And I'm guilty of this up until sort of 7-8 years ago. You know, if there was a swarm stuck in my walls somewhere, I would call the pest guy. Now there are people out there that will happily come to your home and actually collect those bees, because bees are such an important and critical part of the diversity within our ecosystems. If you have mice, rats, possums, don't poison them. Again, personally, this was a hard one for me. We did have a period of a lot of mice and rats around the house, but instead of, for a couple of years, we got the people in to get rid of them with baits and so forth. But then I read an article, you know, that the rats and the mice, they go away, they die, and then an owl comes, and an owl eats quite a lot of these little critters. And so the owls start getting less resilient and more susceptible to getting ill and dying and so forth. And so there is consequences too. And if we're serious about the well-being of biodiversity, then we need to be serious about our relationship within our own backyard, within our own homes. Cockroaches, well, we won't talk about cockroaches. That's one of the ones that I would struggle with not to actually kill. But we don't have that problem. We have a great cat, indoor cat. And so that is my last one, which is if you are going to get a cat to naturally dissuade mice, rats, and other critters from being in your house, keep that cat inside. Cats inside live twice as long as cats outside on average, and you are able to protect the native and non-native biodiversity in your area. Lastly, there are lots of amazing and wonderful websites around, and if you do the seed bombing with Farmwall, you'll get a little course and lots of links to where to find information on this. But these guys, Gardens for Wildlife, are wonderful. Lots of really useful material there for you. So without further ado, I will stop sharing.
Thanks, Dominique. That's yeah, amazing, sensational. It's always really nice to see beautiful pictures of plants, whether they're indoors or outdoors or in Melbourne, and it's always I guess a relief and an affirmation for someone like me to hear that having 38 plants in my room is not it's not just me being obsessive. I'm actually investing in my mental health, and I'm evolutionarily designed to do that. So thanks for that, for confirming that I'm not just crazy. And yeah, thanks to everyone for joining us. We will have a bit of time for a quick Q&A with Dominique. But before we go into that, I'd just like to say again, thank you so much for joining us on a weeknight evening. We are recording this event, and that will be made available on our YouTube channel and also on our ecosystem online community. And as I mentioned at the start, we are doing a quick giveaway. Lucy will post a link to our website in the chat. And if on that website, you can sign up to our newsletter. And what we'll do is after 1 week from now, we'll select someone at random from everyone who's signed up to our newsletter throughout that week. And they'll win a free seed bomb kit, which is our Farmwall seed bomb kit, which is a really, really cool, fun tool for promoting biodiversity in your backyard or front yard or wherever you decide to throw your seed bombs. And it's also a nice, fun, crafty activity to do yourself or with kids or friends or anything like that. So yeah, we can move to the Q&A, and if you have any question, you can post it in the chat, and I'll monitor that and read it out for Dominique, or feel free to unmute yourself. And I'd really like to kick off the questions with a question that I have on my mind, which is that it seems like returning to the city because of COVID is something that may not happen at all in terms of work. Is there any challenges or obstacles that we need to overcome, or advantages to that when it comes to promoting biodiversity in the city?
It's a great question, and I just see lots of opportunity. Part of the next 5 years of coming back to the city, I think, will be to increase the amount of space that we have to be in, so we're not so close to each other. And that means increasing the amount of greenery, increasing the amount of outdoor eating and so forth. So I think there's a great opportunity there. With things like COVID, they are worse on, if you're already in a stressed state, it'll affect you more, like any disease. And so being more connected to nature and having more nature in our own homes and time to look after the nature in our own homes, I only see as a good thing. I can't imagine anybody wanting, or not anybody. I'm sure there are people that can't wait to get back to the office 9 to 5, 5 days a week, but nobody I've spoken to. Everyone's quite happy to go back 2 or 3 times a week because they want to see people in 3D, like sick of seeing people on a flat screen, and just to connect with the energy. But I don't think we all need to, we feel that we need to go back 5 days a week. I think we've proven we can be effective at home. And the benefit of that is that we then have more time to just quickly nip out and, you know, grab some lettuce out of the garden and water the plants and so forth. Yeah, so I think there's great opportunity, and part of that opportunity is that let's use all of the spaces that are underutilised and will be underutilised for the next 5 years to bring in more greenery, to bring in more nature.
Yeah. Sensational. And Michael Slot asked the first question in the chat.
Yeah,
I think.
the B one, I read it. It's a really long question, so people can read it online. And Michael, that is such an excellent question. I'm going to actually ask you to email me so that I can send you some references, because I'm not a bee expert. But the thing with systems that we can't go back. We can't go back to the Australia that was in 1788. We have a system that we live in now. We have a system of food processing, of food growing. We have a lot of animals, plants and so forth that are now introduced, but naturalized is the wrong word, but are well adapted to being here. I actually don't know, but I will find, because I do know somebody who does know the answers to what impact are they having? Are they competing in the same niche as our native bees? The thing is, if we were to get rid of our European and non-native bees, then we would have an impact on, because many of the native bees are adapted to native plants. And so we would have to think about the consequences of that within the whole system on all of the non-native plants. Doesn't mean it's not possible, but we would have to really understand. And I don't know the impact in the niches, so, but I do know someone who does know, so I will get back to you on that.
Awesome. Would you like me to continue reading out the questions, or?
Sure. There was another one there. Yeah, pollinators. Any tips on removing snails? Yep. All right. This is a favourite one of mine. It's a bit mean for the snails, but they die happy. Get a really yeasty beer, a little shallow bowl, really yeasty beer, and the snails come and can eat it, and then you feed it to your chickens, and your chickens are really happy too. Snails do have a niche in the garden though, as most ecosystems do, and so it is also about thinking strategically about where you plant things. So I have my lettuces and so forth in hanging baskets. So I have the less palatable foods lower down and the more palatable foods in wicking beds and hanging baskets around my house. So it's also just about being clever. I don't bait them at all. But they seem to like the beer. I haven't had to use beer for a while, but there are certain times of the year where you have plagues of, I have particularly of slugs, not snails so much, but slugs. They like the beer too. And the chickens like the slugs once they've had the beers.
Beer tasting slug. This sounds like a great way to go, to be honest. Lucy asked a question, which was, how much is the City of Melbourne scaling up greenery and biodiversity in the city?
So this is I've had 4 days at Melbourne, and I'm the zero carbon buildings lead. So I'm managing the transition of the whole of the city's buildings to zero carbon by 2040, not the biodiversity aspect. There was a link in my presentation which you all have access to where you can look into that. There is a significant momentum around increasing biodiversity, and it's not just biodiversity for its sake or for the population's sake, but also urban heat island. Also to, we had during the drought, we had the huge die-off of all of the European trees that had been planted, and so it is also a shifting to a more well-adapted, climate-proof series of ecosystems. There's a lot happening, but I'm not the person to speak to it. But again, shoot me an email and I can forward it to the right people, but that's not me. Ask me about zero carbon buildings.
Byron commented in the chat, he said, how about if local councils substituted monetary infringements for community service tending to the plants, which in theory, that's a great idea. It would get me out into the public gardens even more than I do because of all the parking fines I get.
I don't drive.
Well, there you go.
I have my electric bike. I know I sound like a real hipster. I'm not really. Yeah, look, I think councils are thinking about how to be more creative about things. And councils are getting a lot of pressure now because everyone's at home and in their local communities around things in their communities, a lot more than what they used to get when you used to just close the door and come back at night. And so it is an opportunity to raise these things and actually actively contribute to how your council's working by suggesting these things.
Awesome.
Can I ask a question? Yep. So I've got 2 questions. One of the things, I'm in Warrnambool, so we've had lockdowns, but not to the extent Melbourne has, obviously. But one of the things that's worrying me, and obviously a lot of people, is our young people, our young kids, and the isolation and so forth. So my question is, if we sort of think about next year when they hopefully will be back in school full time, have you seen any particular projects around biodiversity, gardening, etc., that work really well in schools, that if there were groups that wanted to support schools with good projects that might help a transition for the kids back into a school, can you make some suggestions?
So I completely agree with you, and I think that we all should make a commitment to spend more time outdoors and with nature, not just the children, but particularly the children with the nature deficit disorder. And the amount of times, I have a 13-year-old daughter, and the amount of times she's now in front of a screen online it's not well, and to the point where she doesn't want to go outside. We actually have to, it has to be part of what we do every day, and we have to do it together, because she's just turned into a person that just likes to be safely behind her screen. And so I think very much it would be a good idea, and I don't know, but again, I do have somebody who will know what the state government is planning as far as working towards that. All I've heard is that they're very concerned about academic achievement, not so much the nature deficit disorder side of things, but they're fairly progressive, and so I could find out the answer, and even by asking the question, it might prompt them. So if you shoot me an email, I'll follow that up.
Yeah, I'm not even thinking about what the state government's going to do, because I think communities can get together and support projects that are effective in schools. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, my daughter's my daughter's primary school, we had a community garden, and it was integrated into the curriculum. So if they did maths, they might do, you've got 20 seeds in a packet, and you've got 4 kids. How many seeds does each kid get? And then the thing grows so many tomatoes. So so they were linking things in with all of their subjects through the gardens. There's quite a few programs like that, but it's not part of my expertise.
Dylan asked a follow-up question about this topic in the chat, which is, are there any resources about how we can help people in our lives with this issue of screen time and nature deficit disorder?
Yeah, I think there was another question I saw flick past, which was, how do we increase biodiversity in our homes? Mm-hmm. So I'll answer those two together. So the plant life balance research that we did, where we looked at the 101 studies and then took those and created an algorithm for how many plants you need per size space for optimum well-being. So within that app, which is free to download, you just take a photo of your space, and you drag in the plants that you like. And as you drag those plants in, it'll shift your well-being, mental and physical well-being. And so this is a good teaching tool for kids too, about the benefits of plants. And so that's a way. Now, what you get a greater benefit with a diversity of plants rather than a monoculture. So you don't want all peace lilies or all mother-in-law's tongues. You actually want a diversity of plants, flowers, non-flowers, fruiting, edibles, and so forth in your house. So that's that side of diversity. The other thing about diversity and health of plants and your well-being is to have really good soil, because really good soil has really good microorganisms, and if the microorganisms are really good, it's like microorganisms in our gut, then the plants are really healthy, but it also absorbs more toxins and stuff out of the air. So good soil, big pots, diversity of plants for that diversity question. How do you encourage people to not do screens? That's a hard one. I think, if you could solve that one. I know there are apps out there that every 20 or 15 minutes, or you can set it will say have a break, look elsewhere. My daughter has 90-minute classes, and we try and just, kick her outside for 5 minutes between those classes. But when we're both working, it's also not so easy. The main thing is to really get people to understand that connecting to nature actually is like having a good night's sleep. It wakes you up, it enables you to think more clearly, to deal with problems. The last thing you want to do if you're feeling down or have a problem you can't solve is to close the blinds and lock yourself indoors and watch TV. The best thing to do is go for a walk, rain, hail or shine, go outside. But sorry, I don't have a specific solution. And it's also very dependent. We've got to get away from one solution for everybody. Everyone's unique, and what works for one child or one adult may not work for the others. I remember having some Singaporean students in my class, and we I took them on an excursion, and we sat on the grass, and they were horrified. What? You're allowed to sit? You're allowed on and sit on the grass? Well, aren't there bugs? So, I had to really think through how to engage them. And so, different cultures, different people engage with nature in different ways. Having said that, Singapore have done amazing things. I was teaching there 20 years ago, and the amount of change that they've brought in through their awareness of the value of nature, all the way from bringing streams back and the benefits of that to the integration into buildings inside and out is just phenomenal.
Yeah, and it's something that at Farmwall we're quite conscious of, and part of what we do is really trying to bring that connection to nature into the classroom or into the home in the case of when you're doing school from home. With biodiversity, we've done that with the seed bomb kits, so trying to create a fun little tool which is fun to make. You're using your hands, you're not looking at the screen, and then you actually, to use the seed bombs that you've made, you need to go outside and throw them around where where you want those flowers to grow and you want to increase those biodiversity values. And it's the same with a lot of our indoor growing around microgreens and growing food aquaponically or hydroponically indoors or in classrooms. Really trying to connect people back to nature, whether they want to do that in home or outside. So yeah, and I guess something, maybe I'll ask one more question, unless Dominique, you're happy to keep going for a little while.
Yeah, I'm happy to go till 7.
Yeah, so I think the earliest question that I skipped over before that one was Lucy asked, what's happening in Melbourne with zero carbon buildings?
Given that I've been there 4 days, the City of Melbourne have committed to being zero carbon by 2040. And that means bringing all of the buildings with us on that journey towards 2040, towards being zero carbon. My thinking is that we have been working on sustainable buildings in Melbourne for the last 20-25 years, and I think the industry is ready to take on this challenge to do it. And part of my role will be working with the building owners and industry to say, okay, how can we help you to do it? And that will require different tools depending on whether they're shopping centres or museums or apartments or commercial buildings, whether they're A-grade buildings or C-grade buildings, whether they're markets. They'll all require different ways of working with them and enabling them to do that. And there'll be various tools that the city will be working towards. There are also national initiatives towards producing better buildings. There's the National Construction Code, which is coming out, a new version's coming out in 2022. The councils are all working together to look at improved standards for buildings. So there's a lot of work going. And given it's day 4, I can't tell you so much, but maybe invite me back in a year and I can give an update.
Yeah, certainly. And I guess before I ask the next question, I'll add Tami's comment, which was about the previous discussion, which was just that they said, I wonder if the Gardens for Wildlife program might engage with kids too.
Yeah, and Tami actually is, if you guys want a speaker, he's amazing person working at RMIT at the moment, but previously City of Melbourne on the greening and improvement of biodiversity in Melbourne. Cool.
Yeah. And another question, which was from Kate, was, do you know how plants and different species are chosen by the City of Melbourne, or what proportion are Indigenous?
Tami, do you want to chip into that at all? Again, not my area. Within the link that I provided, there is a lot of information. The city has, they've got a climate emergency and a biodiversity emergency, and so under that they have a series of plans of how they're hoping to increase the resilience and diversity of the ecosystems within Melbourne. The thing to think about is City of Melbourne's is quite big, but it actually is for each home and each place. You can do a lot for biodiversity in your own little patch, and that will contribute, particularly if you link into your own council's planting guides and so forth. It will then contribute to the ecological corridors that are being all the councils are working on together, so that, you know, whatever you plant in Hobson's Bay will help whatever you plant. The species connect to Maribyrnong will help connect to whatever the councils are further around, and so
Moreland
forth.
and then Darebin and
and it all connected around the watershed of this region that we live in.
that was something that that we were quite conscious of when we were selecting the seeds for our biodiversity kit, seed bomb kits. Something that I really, when someone says corridors, I often think of the Bluebanded Bee. Just knowing that they only travel, I think at most 300 meters from where they nest, which is as individuals in little holes in the ground or sometimes in masonry or brickwork. So that's not a very long distance for a bee. And if they've got flowers, particularly blue flowers, which they go for, that are, you know, in people's backyards, kind of connecting that short range, then you can really help bring those blue-banded bees back into the city. And then we picked a really bright blue flower for our seed bomb kits for that exact reason. And also because they're a native bee which have that unique shaking pollination technique, which for some plants, some of which are actually, I know, endangered, like the matted flax lily, blue-banded bees are actually the only, or one of the only pollinators that can help keep that plant alive and existing in the wild. So yeah, another question we had was from Isabel, which was, do you know any significant or iconic buildings in the city that have already achieved zero carbon?
So the City of Melbourne, all of its buildings have been zero carbon since 2012. Now, you need to be very careful with how you talk about zero carbon. So my intention is that all aspects of the building will be zero carbon, from the materials to the operations to the end of life, and that so it's not just the operational bits, which often people just look at the operational bits. But the City of Melbourne, as I said, has been carbon neutral since 2012, and they're slowly shifting. So they're becoming more and more. So a lot of it, a significant amount of it, is offset. So they plant ecosystems around Australia to offset their carbon, but they're becoming more and more efficient. So there's less and less of that offset, which is the intent. You know, at some point you don't want to, you know, have your heating on and your windows open, and then be therefore spending a lot of money planting things. It's about behaviour. It's about the efficiency of your equipment, and renewable energy and offsetting. So it's a whole suite of things. So yes, all of the City of Melbourne buildings. But there are others. A lot of the high tier buildings are aiming for zero carbon, particularly around operations, and many of the big high end of town building owners are also, because their shareholders are asking for it, are working towards that. It's the lower middle tier of the buildings that we need to work with. It's the everyday householder as well.
Yeah, spot on. As far as I can see, there are no more questions in the chat. There are a lot of thank yous. I guess I won't go through them all, but it's a pretty consistent big exclamation mark thank you from everyone. Another question did just drop in, Catherine. Sorry, Kate. It is, have the City of Melbourne buildings been operationally carbon neutral since 2012 or cradle to the grave carbon neutral?
It's a great question, and being day 4 there, I don't have the ready answer. My sense would be it's operationally, but if I can
actually answer that.
Yes.
Sorry, it is operationally, not everything cradle to grave. In fact, it's actually many that are cradle to grave.
Yeah. So, but it's my intent that if we're serious about this, if we are going to step up and be a positive part of the ecosystem in our future, then what we need to do is actually be positive. Right? We need to actually be contributing to the health and vitality and viability of the place that we live in. And so it's not just about cradle to cradle negative, it's actually about being cradle to cradle positive. How is every building providing value ecologically, socially, and so forth? Also accepting that we have an impact by existing, right? We will always have an impact, but we want to invest that impact in creating a greater benefit. But as I said, ask me back in a year and I'll report back day 4.
Dominique, will you be running sessions for community members of City of Melbourne around how biodiversity can be adopted?
I won't be, but I can imagine that because I'm in the buildings energy section of it, but I can imagine that the biodiversity people would be as part of their plan. But I'll actually take that on board. I didn't see who said that, but I will take that on board and feed it back into I am part of the team in which the biodiversity team sits, so I will pass it on to them that, one of the suggestions was that they work with community. But the City of Melbourne generally does do quite a bit of work with community, and again, Tammy, you can chip in here. But I will pass that suggestion on.
I'm selfishly asking the question because I live in Warrnambool, as I said before.
Yeah.
We have an apartment at South Bank at the Arts Precinct, and I know that there's been a lot of greening done at the Arts Precinct, but we haven't pretty much been there for 15 months. So when we get back down there, it'd be great to see if there are any community sessions where we can sort of see what we can do in our apartment.
Yep. I will pass on that suggestion.
I think we can probably wrap it up there. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and a massive, massive thank you to Dominique for joining us this evening. The presentation was sensational, and the Q&A has been sensational as well. I've certainly learnt a lot. And maybe to leave on a positive, I can share this image, which I believe is a good indicator of biodiversity returning to the city, or at least showing strong. This is just a cute little skink that popped into the Farmwall headquarters in Alphington a few months ago, and after the skink, we had a nice little common froglet pop in, and we know there's also a fair few snakes around, lots of birds, rosellas, and I also recently went to visit the seal that's in the Yarra, which I don't know if that's a good indicator of biodiversity. I know the seal has plenty of food, probably some non-native fish as well as native, but yeah.
That reminded me, Patrick, that there's a development that I've been working on in Castlemaine where there's 27 homes being built, but when we looked at the development, we actually designed it to bring back 5 apex species. Because if we bring back the owl, the glider, the legless lizard, the growling grass frog, and the golden moth butterfly, the golden sun moth butterfly, then we've created all of the systems underneath it. So the soil must be good enough, the water must be good enough, there must be better microorganisms than worms and so forth to have those apex species come back. And we've had three of the species come back already, and the development's only half built. And we also had an echidna move in. So the owl's back, the moths are back, the growling grass frogs are back, and an echidna's decided to move in. And we weren't even designing it for the echidna, so there you go.
Awesome. That is awesome. Yeah, whenever I hear frogs, I remember what someone once said to me. In fact, I think it might have been John Rayner from University of Melbourne, which is that frogs are an excellent biomarker. It means the water's good. It means there's birds there that are going to eat them, probably snakes too, and they're also there eating a lot of bugs and other things. So I'm really glad to hear that. That's very cool that you've
That's called the paddock, if people want to look it up.
As people of Melbourne. Yeah, awesome. Great to hear successes like that. Thanks everyone. We can end it here, and yeah, hope everyone has a nice rest of the evening and a nice rest of the week.
Go enjoy nature.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Dominique,
That's great.
thanks, Beth. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Farmwall.
Thank you.